G'day everybody, welcome to the workshop. It is another frosty morning here. Got 2 jackets on. I did start the day with 2 hats, but I took one of them off because it looked ridiculous and, we have to be presentable. So, today I'm working on this table that you can see behind me. This thing, you may have seen the components in formation in other videos. It is a design of mine. The legs all fold out to form essentially a drop leaf table. Here are some of the leaves here shining in the sunshine. Now, all of these leaves were repurposed from an old American oak table that was highly sentimental to the client. And she wanted to give them new life and create a table that suited her apartment and what she needed now. But she didn't want to just get rid of the old timber because the tabletop means something to her. And there are even signs of previous use on the old tabletop which mean something to her. The base is all new oak and I'm going to stain it all so it looks the same as best I can. And what we're looking at today is how to keep old pieces like this or even new flat panels nice and flat. So I'm going to show you how this looks when the leaves are installed and show you what the problem is. So you might not be able to tell from the video here, but you will in a second. This tabletop is not dead flat. Now, that is not the fault of the frame, the base, although there might be a few mil here or there that I can adjust in that. The panels themselves, which were the existing panels from the old table, just are slightly bowed. And this is common in old furniture. It's also common in new furniture. It's an inherent problem with really thin panels like this, and occasionally thick ones. They generally are bowing along the glue lines. It's not the glue lines that are bending, but the timber is bending, sort of cupping along the length of it. And I need to figure out a way to make them stay flat. So I'm going to create some timber battens underneath these drop leaves that will hold them flat. So if we look along this top edge, there's about a mil or 2 between the ruler and the table on the top there, but that's okay, I can deal with that. There are ways, but this is a serious deviation from flat. You can see that there is about 12 mil of drop along the width of this leaf. The leaf itself is around 600 mil wide, and you can see that it falls towards the outside. As I was mentioning, each board has slightly cupped. Now, this timber is only about 20 mil thick. The original table had a pretty deep apron on it, which meant that there was a frame on the original table that supported all of this timber, which would have stopped it from dropping. There was a couple of things I could have done differently. I could have laminated additional timber onto all of these panels to thicken them up, and that may have helped. But ultimately, sometimes you end up with a bow that's even more difficult to remove than if you've just stuck with a thin panel. And what I need to do is add some sort of timber batten under here, going from the middle of the table to the outside here. That is going to bring that leaf back into flat. It needs to look good, and it needs to still allow the table, the timber, to expand and contract as it needs to seasonally, which is only a few mil, but we can't just screw a piece of timber on there and hope it stays flat. Okay, let's get to it. So I've got the stock that I'm going to use as the battens. It's about 34 mil thick by, 55. It has been laminated together from pieces I've salvaged from this old table, so it's nice to kind of keep some of the old timber back in use. And they're oversized right now. Essentially, I'm going to shape them. I'm going to try and keep the shape, the profile in line with the curves and the angles that I've got on the existing table, so it will feel like it's part of it. And then we screw it to the underside of the table. But the trick is we need to make sure those screws can still move. We don't have a ton of meat in the tabletop for the screws to bite into. So I may end up using insert nuts because they are probably going to be stronger, epoxied into that tabletop. And yeah, so we're going to lay this out, cut it to size, do some shaping, and then I'll show you how to insert the slots and the nuts and the screws and flatten this thing out. Whenever I'm working on panels that are already glued up, they're going to form part of a finished piece. At a certain point, I start putting everything on soft fabrics, soft surfaces rather than down on my workbench, because even if my workbench is swept or vacuumed, inevitably there's some tiny piece of, sometimes all it needs to be is grit or sawdust, and it will scratch up the top. Now that scratching can be deeper than I'm willing to sand that thing off. So if I've sanded the piece, or even if I haven't, this is a great way to protect yourself from causing damage that you either can't repair or don't have time to. I'm going to cut both of these down to 600, then do some shaping. This is just a template. I couldn't fit my full piece into right next to the component that I was trying to trace. So I'm making a template and then taking this over to the component so I can do it that way. This one, not much of a gap at all. I can kind of press that out pretty easily. So we will do them the same because I want them to look nice and be symmetrical. This one has about 3 mil and it's quite stiff. So this is definitely going to be the problem one. What I'm going to use is these little insert nuts. You can get these in a variety of sizes. This is a 13 mil. These ones here are about 16 mil. And I've got some honking big ones here. I have about 19 mil of timber in my tabletop, which is very thin for a tabletop, but I need to send them in really carefully to make sure that I'm not bottoming them out. What can happen, and has happened to me before, is if you're sending a 16 mil insert nut into a 19 mil top, and you screw it in too hard, that remaining 3 mil of timber can be forced up and can either split or just tear out completely, which needs to be repaired. So it's really important that you don't send these nuts too deep, and it's equally important that you don't send any bolt that goes into that too deep, because that will do the same thing. It is gonna punch through the timber on the top that you're trying to protect. In an ideal situation, you have plenty of timber, you can leave some excess hole below the nut, and the bolt can just go straight into that. But in this situation, we need everything to be exact. So I've marked my center line here, and I've marked my hole locations, which is here and here. So I'm going to place insert nuts here and here, and then these bolts will go through the timber there and there. Now, because this is bowed in this direction, I can get away with only putting these 2 bolts in. If it was bowed in the other direction, I would need to be putting bolts down really close to the edge, rolling everywhere, instead of in the center. But the methodology still applies. What we are going to do is we're going to have to cut these bolts down so that they're not too long. We're going to countersunk them into a slot here and here so that they can move slightly. And then we're going to measure it up so that they don't punch through the top. All right, let's drive these little things in. Before you start drilling holes into your tabletop, it's important to check the fit of the holes that you're placing these little nuts into. Depending on how hard the timber is, will depend on how much space you need to leave for the little wings on these little insert nuts. So at the widest point, these wings measure at 11 millimeters. The core of this nut measures at around 8 mil. So I'm gonna try an 8.5 mil drill bit into some American oak, into the same timber. That's important, and see how it drives in. So I need the Allen key that's going to drive that in, and I need to drill this hole to 13 mil. So I'm going to mark that depth on my drill bit. If your hole is too small, you can split the timber, or you can actually break these little insert bits. They're not wildly strong. If the hole is too large, then they're not really biting enough into the timber and they could pull out. Now I'm able to turn that in. There was a little bit of kind of tear out where the wing of that insert nut sort of tore a bit of timber out. So it might be worth just countersinking the surface a little bit more, but that more or less went in and it feels very strong. I'm gonna do one more and see if I get that same amount of tear out and if I need to deal with that in a slightly different way. Okay, so a little chamfer on the top edge, a little countersink, stopped the tear out. That worked really well. It seems really firm. I think an 8.5 mil bit in this timber is the correct choice. So, just got to drill my holes. And I need to be super careful that I'm not going through the tabletop. Something to be aware of when you're using these brad point bits, which is always my preference for timber work, is that the brad point sits lower than the flat point. So if you're drilling a 16 mil hole, 16 mil deep in 19 mil timber, that brad point will poke out the other side. So make sure that you've done a test or you've held it up to the side of the tabletop to make sure that you're not going through. Okay, now I can just screw these little friends in. Because I don't have a whole lot of space for the bolt to go through this nut, I can really only use the thread in there and possibly not even all of it because I do not want the bolt to touch the other side and burst through the timber. I'm gonna actually leave these a little bit proud and then grind or sand them off. They're just nickel plated steel. They should cut down fairly easily. The top sort of 6 mil of this little insert nut is actually just the hex drive portion. It has 0 thread, so is not any use to me once this is embedded. So I don't mind if I lose 3 mil of that. That's a little unconventional and only necessary because this table is thin. So that's just some of what's going on in my brain right now. Okay, so I drove one of these with an Allen key. It worked okay, but I don't have a lot of control, especially when it's just entering. That's when you risk tear out the most. This next one, I've put a hex bit into the drill. I'm gonna run it at a slow speed. I can maintain constant pressure coming down from the top, which is important. Okay, so now we've got our little insert nuts drilled in there. We just need to place a slot in corresponding locations in the center of this little beam. I've placed this, exactly 40 mil from the inside, wherever you want that to be. I'm gonna mark the center of each hole. I'm gonna label this so that I know which one is which. And then I will use a square to follow that line around on my little flattening beam or batten. There's one, there's the other. And I know I want these to be exactly in the center of here, so I can just find the center, and that's my hole location. The key thing that makes this work is that we're not just drilling a hole for the bolt, we are making a slot. Now, the best way that I can do that is with a domino, because it makes a lovely neat little slot, and I can use a larger domino on the top side to make the countersink component. However, if you don't have a domino machine, I would suggest drilling 2 holes, one at the extent of the slot, and then removing the waste material with a very fine chisel. I will do one with the domino, and I guess I'll do one with the drill to show you. So I did a 6 mil hole from the back because that's the size that the bolt will fit into. So the bolt slides in there really easily. And then I'll do a hole from the front side, which is large enough to accept the head of the bolt and any washer that you want to put in there. That's how simple it is with the domino. I'm going to do one with the drill bit now. So make sure you found the center. This thing is 55 mil. So that's 27.5. I want my slot to be 19 mil wide. So we do 19 minus 6, which is the width of the bit, which will give us our 2 center points. So that's 13. Divide that by 2, which is 6.5. So we want each center point to be 6.5 millimeters away from our center line. So I want 6.5 here and here. You can always use the sharp points on the caliper to mark that little dot and then put a pencil on it. So those are going to be the center point for my brad point drill bit, here and here, and that will give me that 19 mil slot. Okay, I'm going to drill this on the drill press because the holes will be a lot straighter. So there's a couple important steps here. We've got our small slot on the bottom, which we're going to recreate with the drill press, but we also need a larger slot on the top that can accept the head of the nut so that it's countersunk. If you just wanted the head to sit on the face of the timber, on the underside of the table, and it's not really seen, that's fine. You can just continue this slot all the way through. In this case, I do want it countersunk because it's a nice piece of furniture, and I don't think you should be seeing a whole bunch of bolts, even if it's under the table. So I have an 11 mil brad point drill bit, which fits the head. I am going to set that to a depth so that it only goes down about 10 mil, which will take me to the extent of where that smaller slot goes up to. That will be my countersink. I've got to do a hole on either side to create the extents of the slots, and then I will take out the waste using a chisel. So I'll lock the depth off, I'll do those 2 cuts, and we'll be good to go. Now I can do the smaller drill bit, the 6 mil. I've drilled a couple of holes from the top and I'll clean out the rest with a chisel. You have the option of just changing over to the 6 mil and going straight through from the top, which works fine. You kind of can't go the other way. You can't drill a small hole and then try and drill a larger hole because the brad point has nothing to sit in. If you're using a standard drill bit without a brad point, they do kind of self-center. Or you can just come through from the back if you've marked everything out really well. So now we just need to clean up those holes with the chisel. Depending on how accurately you've done your drilling will depend on how much material you need to remove and how neat those holes are. Pretty simple really. There's my slot and you can see the 6 mil hole underneath, which I just need to clear out some waste. But the bolt will go in there, sit below the surface, and can slide if it needs to. This size slot is absolutely overkill for the amount of expansion that this piece is going to experience. These 2 holes are rather close together. It's probably only going to get a mil or 2 of expansion, so absolutely much wider slots than I need. You can, in certain circumstances, get away with just drilling a larger hole. But if these 2 mounting holes were quite far apart, 600 or wider, then a slot of this size might be more appropriate because you could experience quite a lot of expansion across that distance. So the length of the slot is kind of dictated by how much expansion you are expecting. So I've got my rebatted batten that has my slots and my little countersunk slot on the top. Got my nuts in there. I have shortened these bolts so that they're only sticking out exactly 12 mil, and I'm using a tiny little washer which reduces that length to about 11 mil. So I'm off the 13.5 that I have, even if the timber compresses slightly. And now I can screw it down. So as I apply pressure on those screws, the little bolts, I can see that gap closing up, which is exactly what I want. And they're working together so that not too much pressure is on any one of those nuts. I only want to get that flush. So now, I can flip this over and check that it is flush. Something you've got to consider is we've got two forces acting together. Two things can happen. Either the tabletop can bend to where you want it to go, or the batten can bend to the tabletop. Sometimes both of those things happen at the same time. If you find that your batten is bending, but it is and not applying enough force to the tabletop, either your batten needs to be stronger for the job it's trying to do, so thicker, deeper, or sometimes you can actually add a camber, a negative camber or a positive camber, depending on the direction you need the table to bend, to the batten, so that you're actually trying to pull the table past square to positive, and as the batten is also bending, you have given it that camber, that little bit of space to bend and still do its job. I am going to put a ruler on this side and see how we look. So we still have about 5 mil of fall from one end to the other when the ruler is put across there, which means I do need to shape this batten slightly to apply a bit more pressure. One way you can think about that camber, or how much camber you need to add, is actually just by using spacers on either end. You could possibly even get away with just using spacers and not shaping the batten. But let's loosen that off until it's got a bit of space so I can wiggle it. I'm going to place a 1.5 mil spacer in at each end, tighten it up again and see if it goes flat. If it goes flat, then I have the choice to either just place a little wooden spacer onto the batten at each end, or shape the batten by that amount to hollow it out in the center to allow for that amount of bend to occur. A chicken has just wandered into the workshop. What are you doing, lady? You looking for scraps? That's sawdust, my friend. Tightening these up bit by bit. And we can kind of check for square as we go. Still a lot further to go. Keep tightening. It's getting so much closer. So even with my spacers, 1.5 at either end, my batten is now touching the timber in the center. And that has brought the tabletop into square. So I think I'm going to trace that camber into the batten and give it a really gentle shape on the bobbin sander. So I needed to draw that camber onto the batten so that I can shape it, and the way that I am doing it is by clamping it onto my jointer, or just anything that is big enough that it won't bend, but the batten will bend. I'm using my spacer, my 1.5 mil shim on either side. So I've made the timber do the curve I want, and then I can use something that is flat to then draw the flat surface onto the timber. Rather than trying to draw a curved surface on the timber, I've curved the timber and I'm going to draw a flat line. Let's see if that works. So that works pretty well. You can see that the line is right on the edge of the timber here, and it's about a couple mil up there, or about 2 mil, which is what I want. And I'm going to sand this so that I can still see the line. So I'll end up sanding about 1.5 mil off. So, a bit of time on the bobbin sander, and you can see I've created this really consistent camber that curves really naturally. It's actually the radius that the timber wanted to bend from end to end. So now I can apply a bit more pressure to this tabletop and keep it exactly where I want it. This table needs a couple more tweaks before I can put oil on it and get it out of my workshop, but Those panels that I tried to flatten have been flattened. The top now looks lovely and flat. I don't see this diving off anymore, and I have tested it with a level. This is the one that I cambered by about 1.5 mil. And you can see that I've actually got another 1 mil packer on each end. So I'm gonna add a little bit more cambering to this one, just to get the tension that I need. And this one I didn't camber, but I then had to add 1 mil on each side as well. So it will also get a slight cambering. There's also some packers on these wings which support the tabletop, but this is a very fluid design. It's very springy, and as one member moves, others tend to move in opposition or in concert. So it's a bit fiddly, but we will get there. I'll show you the movement of these arms coming out and the wings coming down. So that closes, that closes, and that hangs down like that. There's a little interlocking joint here, which keeps it all nice and secure when it locks in. Let's do that other one. And that's it in its dropped form, where it's designed to kind of go against a wall and act a little bit like an addition to a kitchen bench or an island. It can be used in a configuration with one open or both open, and it has been a tricky little animal, but it's getting there. I've created battens like this for so many tables. There's just been so many times when, even with great timber selection, very dry timber, good glue up, timber is was living, moving organic object, and it will move and respond to moisture, and sometimes sitting around in the workshop it'll just bend a little. So even through all of our best efforts, we often need to stop that bending happening, or that cupping across the boards. And this is the way that you do that without affecting the structural integrity. If you just screw something to the bottom without allowing for movement, over time it will crack and it will destroy itself. And very often when furniture gets thrown away because it's got a big crack in the top, that is why it has not been allowed to move. So I hope this has shown you how you can create those slots, how you can create those battens, and then how you can shape those battens to add additional tension where you need to. They don't have to look ugly. Ideally, they enhance the piece rather than taking anything away from it. And they can save a piece from being a bit warped to being perfectly flat. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you've got a lot out of this. You can click down below for links to some of the products that I've used. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I probably will have a couple more videos about this table over the next couple of weeks because it's what I'm working on, and inevitably some other weird little thing is going to come up that I feel like would make a good video. So hit me up in the comments if you've got any questions about the construction for this particular piece, and I'll see you next week. Thanks a lot for watching.